Hi, it's Byzantine. Long time no see. I haven't been making any videos recently because I've been sewing quite a lot. And today I'm gonna share with you a padding technique that is strictly connected to sewing. And stay tuned, keep watching, even if you're not into sewing. Maybe you'll be inspired to start sewing. There's too much sewing in one sentence, so let's move on. For those who don't know, I will introduce myself once again. I'm Byzantine. I'm a fashion designer living currently in Poland, in Europe, and I'm gonna talk to you about the subject that I'm not an expert in, and I'm not the best at sewing, but I've been doing it for like 10 years now, and I know some tips and tricks for the beginners, and some techniques are more advanced. Padding is, I would say, in the middle, depending on what you're gonna pad and how you're gonna pad, and I'm gonna show you a couple examples of it. So currently I'm making this jacket, which is padded. I decided to pad this fabric because it's then more softer and nicer to wear, especially with stiffer fabrics. It's nice to pad, and it gives more interest to the design as well. So basically what is padding? I'm sure that most of you probably saw a Chanel bags that are mostly padded. The most famous ones are. I would say that padding is to some extent compromising the fabric, adding a another layer of like this. Well, it's not cotton, but it's this fluffy material in the middle, so the garment is softer. Sometimes padding is used for adding volume, for adding uh, interesting structure, for warming purposes, because the most often outwear is padded, and especially in the fall winter outwear. So this is how padding looks like. And what you're gonna need for padding is three things. First of all, your the main fabric that you're gonna pad. The layer of this padding material, I don't know how it's called properly in English, and it can differ. This one is very thin, it can be thicker. I'm just padding for the purpose of padding. I don't want to add more volume or warmth to the garment I'm making. And another thing is going to be like your lining, because transporter of the sewing machine cannot go easily through this material, so you're gonna need a lining. And if I could suggest you, do not use any satin fabric as your lining. Yes, you can do it, and if it's done professionally by company, they often use like this satin, like this polyester satin fabric. But if you do it at home, it's way easier to use like this cotton fabric or muslin to do this, because it's not sliding that much. And this is the basics what you're gonna need for padding. I cannot talk too much while doing it. That's why this video is going to be mainly theoretical. In terms of making a pattern while padding the pattern on a fabric, I would suggest you do it before you pin it to the padding fabric, and you do it before starting to sew. You can of course freestyle but it's way more complicated and there's way more room for mistakes. What else I could suggest is that you stick to the geometrical patterns, because then it's more easier. Remember, it's still compromising the structure of a fabric. This fabric has kind of a diagonal structure, but still I would suggest for you to incorporate a diagonal seams throughout the fabric. um, I don't know why, but it works way better. As you can see here, I'm not going diagonal, but I'm gonna add it at the very end after I will sew this. You know, it's very difficult to go straight. You should go diagonal. What I would suggest, not horizontal or vertical. You can do it, but you know, not with every fabric, and it's rather more advanced technique. Not, it's difficult to make on a regular home sewing machine. So try to keep it diagonal, geometrical, um, and probably with time you will get more practice and you will get more comfortable with adding different patterns. I will show you a couple patterns that I made on a different fabric. So right now, okay, so here are just a few examples on a velvet. When it's padded, as you can see, you can make different patterns like this. These patterns I made with embroidery foot on my sewing machine, but it is not necessary. It is easier if you have quite steady hand, but it's not necessary. Look at this one, for instance. It's rather gathered pattern. Your crisscross, kind of freestyle, and freestyle here and too. But I always try to keep the seam diagonal. You know, it's easier, the fabric can handle it better, and the machine will help you with your sewing as well. Because, as I would say, the sewing machine is an extension of your hands, so you should work well together. Here's some up close shots, and we move on to the next step. Okay, so once you marked your pattern, you right before sewing, you pin it to the your padding fabric and your lining, keeping in mind always that at the very beginning your padding fabric and your lining should be bigger than your main fabric, and try to keep it simple, like rectangle, for instance, and do not go more into details. The reason you do this is because the transporter, the I don't know, how do you call it, like the um, teeth of the transporter have a tendency to, I don't know if it's the right noun right now, a verb actually right now, they tend to follow the fabric, so it means they transport the bottom fabric more than the top fabric. I don't know if you know what I mean. This is why you should keep the bottom fabrics a little bit bigger, but always have an eye on what's going on the inside. On the bottom, because you know, many different things may happen. Look, this is the inside of my jacket. Yeah, it you know, it looks like it's a little bit gathered, but it's actually not. It's still going against the structure of the fabric, but it should look more or less like this, without any folds. Avoid folds, because you know, it will be way harder to work with the fabric once you finish. And in terms of pinning, this is like my last advice before sewing. Do not pin around the fabric. It's way harder then. Just pin in the middle, so the fabric has a plenty of room to work on its own. Plus, once you sew, what I would suggest, start in the middle, right here, for instance, and work your way out, because then you will be like 99% sure that you know everything in it is in the right position, and the fabric doesn't gather at the bottom, doesn't create folds, and work your way out. And how, for me, and what I've noticed works the best, is that when you start in the middle and you sew every other seam first, and then you fill in the rest of the seams after you're finished with your every other seam, then it secures the fabric in place, and it's not being followed on the bottom. And this is what I've learned, and I hope that everything is quite clear. Feel free to ask me in the comments below any other questions, and I will show you how to pad on a sewing machine. I hope I will be able, because it is very important to hold your fabric with your two hands. So here I go. I start with a middle stitch that I have to make. And what I would also suggest, because the home machine doesn't have a long arm, you fold the fabric. You make sure that nothing is in the way of the fabric on the bottom, and you try to go quite slowly. See, this is probably the best way to do. Do not go too fast. Make sure that your sewing machine is going well, and the pedal is not stuck. And I will end with a few stitches. And what I would also suggest you, that you go clean on the bottom. Let me get out of here and I will show you what I mean. What I would suggest you go clean on the bottom, which means that always when you're done, cut the excess thread here, hold on, you're not seeing it, here, and also on the top. You want to keep it very clean, and cut everything that is not necessary, because you don't want it to go in the way of your next stitch, and it may cause you have to start once again, because it may get a little bit fiddly. Yeah, so this is what I'm gonna do right now. I did this stitch, so I'm gonna go with every other stitch. And what I didn't mention is that padding works best on a small, padding at home works best on a small pieces of fabric. So the smaller the piece, the better, the easier it's going to be for you, because you won't have to roll it over. Yeah, it's gonna be easier. And I'm gonna show you the finished product. Before I will show you the finished padded front of the jacket, I thought that I will show you when it's the best time to cut off the excess fabric you had around your piece of fabric. As you can see, I stitched every other stitch, plus I made sure that the last stitch on each end was made. So the fabric is secure already. It's not gonna need more fabric than it is in here, so it's going to be easier for you to finish it. Plus, you probably rubbed off most of your soap, so if you need it, you can go once again with your soap for you to see the lines better that you have to sew. Yep. So see you in a second. So this is it. This is a finished padded front, and I would say that be patient with it. Every technique needs a strategy, and especially sewing. Sewing is so much about strategy. Not many people say that, but you have to think over how you're gonna sew things, and in which direction, and what first, what next, what last. Usually it is not said this way, but sewing is a lot about strategy and practice. Of course, I love this quote, practice makes perfect, as with everything. Okie dokie, so that would be the basics of padding the fabric. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that maybe possibly I convinced you to getting a sewing machine, because I truly believe that sewing machine is necessary at home. It doesn't have to be an expensive sewing machine, but there's always need for it, no matter what. Sometimes maybe you have a rip in your pants, a rip in your shirt, you want to shorten something. There's always needs for a sewing machine, at least to me, and I think that to most of the people. I hope I'll see you next time. Please subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram. Have a nice day, or evening, or morning, depending on when you watch it. Kisses. Mwah.